Welcome. This episode is being recorded at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time on Thursday, October 29th, 2020. As you know, all aspects of COVID-19 change rapidly. So please note that all thoughts, recommendations, and advice that are expressed by Holden Litigation today are as of October 29th of 2020. If you have a question at any time during our episode, please go ahead and put that question into our Q&A box, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can later on in the episode. Anything that we can't get to live, we will be sure to answer via email. But for now, let's head on over to our Holden Institute. A North Carolina restaurant group is the first to get a COVID-19 physical loss coverage. Judge Orlando F. Hudson Jr. ruled that the Cincinnati Insurance Company owed the restaurant group coverage for their losses stemming from state-mandated COVID-19 shutdowns. The restaurant group's attorney says that this is the first decision to hold that shutdown orders to contain the virus caused a physical loss. In his ruling, Judge Hudson stated that the plain definition of the term direct physical loss includes an inability to utilize something in the real, material, or bodily world resulting from a given cause. He went on to say that that does not need to be a physical alteration to actually trigger coverage. And I think a lot of attorneys and insurance companies around the United States are going to be very carefully watching that case, and for others it will probably result as well. The unemployment rate in September went down to 7.9% from a high of 14.7% in April. We are hoping that those numbers go down even further. On October 24th of 2020, the United States reported more than 85,000 new COVID-19 cases, thus setting a record for daily cases. There was also a 7-day average high as well of 73,094 cases, and that data is as of October 28th of 2020. Also notably, on October 25th, the city of El Paso here in Texas imposed a curfew for their residents because they have run out of ICU beds. So our thoughts and prayers are most definitely with the city of San Antonio and other cities across the nation and across the world for that matter that are being affected to such a great extent. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the numbers. These numbers are provided by the Washington Post, and they are updated as of October 28th, 2020. And they show us a glimpse of what has happened with regard to COVID cases over the past week. We can see that the new daily cases have risen up by 19.8%. New daily reported deaths rose to 5.4%. And COVID-related hospitalizations have also risen 9.5%. And again, we are definitely thinking about people being affected by COVID, and we send them our thoughts and prayers, and we hope that we get to see these numbers rapidly decline. On a brighter note, I would like to introduce today's panelist. Sam Johnson is a 12-year lawyer, and he is a principal at Johnson & Sparks PLLC in Plano, Texas. Sam is a super lawyer, rising star, and a 2020 candidate for District Court Judge in Collin County, Texas. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
And I am Kristen Lawhorn. I am a 10-year attorney and a graduate of the SMU Devlin School of Law. I also have the honor and privilege to be the managing partner of Holden Litigation's Dallas office. Now, Sam, you and I, like many people around the world, for the past 7 months have kind of just observed the way that COVID-19 has impacted our lives and the world as we had previously known it. But you have some personal experience as to how COVID-19 has affected litigation, specifically with trials. Now, Sam, you recently attended a bench trial via Zoom, correct?
That's correct, yes.
That's awesome. So obviously we're going to be talking about that today, but our intent is for our webinar to reach a broad audience and some people are not familiar with the world of litigation. So for our audience, could you explain the difference between a bench trial and a jury trial?
Absolutely. In any case, what happens is a trial is where facts are decided. Someone decides what actually happened between the parties to the lawsuit. And then the judge, no matter what type of trial it is, takes those facts and applies the law, and that's how you reach the outcome of that case. So in a jury trial, that's what most people are familiar with from movies and TV, is a group of citizens, the jury panel, decides the facts of what happened and then runs that through the law, which the judge does. In a bench trial, we present our evidence and arguments only to the judge without a jury, and the judge both decides the factual aspects of what occurred and then how the law applies to those facts.
Now, Sam, what county was your case pending in?
It was pending in Collin County, which is directly north of Dallas County in Texas.
And can you tell us what type of case it was involved?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was a divorce case with a couple that had been married for decades. All of their children are adults now, so there were no custody issues or anything to fight over. But it was a large multi-million-dollar community estate with high value assets, residential home, lake house, boats, annuities, stocks, all that kind of stuff.
Wow, like I'd like to have them as friends. Now, can you tell us like how this case actually went to bench trial via Zoom?
Yes, so this was always going to be a bench trial for us. No one made a jury demand, and just due to the nature of the estate and the claims, this was always planned to be a bench trial. When we scheduled it, it was scheduled in the early spring for an August 2-day trial setting in front of the judge. We thought in the courthouse, where we've always done our trials. But obviously with the pandemic, that shook things up a little bit. So what actually ended up happening is, due to everyone's schedules getting jumbled around and the nature of Zoom proceedings, we ended up having 4 half-day sessions scheduled with the judge for this trial. Yeah, we had 2 days in August, and then a couple weeks in between, and then 2 more days in September.
Now, how did the parties and I guess witnesses deal with the gap in time? Was that difficult?
It was a challenge. Lawyers, when we're preparing for trial, we spend a lot of time beforehand, sometimes more time than the trial itself takes, preparing for everything, right? We want to get our exhibits ready, we want to get our witnesses ready, and we need to get ourselves ready. And we're used to doing that, showing up, doing the trial, whether it's a half day or a week long, and then you're done. Here, I think the biggest challenge was for the lawyers to track how presentation of evidence was going and all that kind of stuff. The witnesses seemed fine with it, really. One benefit was actually that with the big gap between the 2 sets of days, we were actually able to order a rough draft of our transcript from the first 2 days and use that to help us finish preparing or add to our preparation for the second 2 days.
And Sam, I know you said that this had always been intended to be a bench trial, but did any of the parties initially have any hesitation about actually doing it via Zoom, as opposed to just waiting until things with COVID got better and doing an in-person bench trial?
I would say yes, there was hesitation, I think, on everyone's part, for the lawyers and the parties. But when we were trying to coordinate with the court to figure out what was going to happen, that's when we found out we would be split up into multiple half days spread out. And we asked if there was any way to avoid that or avoid the Zoom altogether. And we were told, basically, this is your schedule, or we can wait until everything is back to normal. Yeah. So we moved on.
And, one of the most interesting things to me and questions I've had when I realized that Zoom trials were now a thing is like, where is everybody? Like, are you at home, like with your shorts on doing trial? Like, how does this work?
That's a great question. So in our case, Judge, I couldn't tell for sure. It seemed like Judge may have been at home, may have also been at the courthouse every now and then. But she had a virtual background on with the courtroom behind her. So, and then I was working from home at my home office. My co-counsel on the case, she was at our office, in her office there, and our client was in the conference room at our office. And then the other side, opposing counsel was at his real office, and his client, I think, sometimes was at home and sometimes was at his lawyer's office. And then all of the non-party witnesses seemed to be from home offices as well. So everybody was in different places.
Now, so were y'all required to do like any type of run through just to see how things would go so that you could ensure that things would go smoothly when it was actually go time?
Nothing with the court. The court didn't direct us to or advise us to. On our side of the case, we did log in, and run through some things. We had also taken depositions in the case via Zoom, so we had some familiarity with the process, but obviously a trial is very different. So.
Now, were exhibits presented during trial? And if so, like, how did y'all present everything?
Right, great question. So yes, we used exhibits. And for those of you that don't know, with documents, especially, we have a certain set of questions we usually have to ask before we can have a document admitted into the record in a case, or officially as evidence, I guess you could say. And so we had agreements with the other side on a lot of exhibits that were just automatically admitted. But when we had other exhibits that we had to prove up, that's what we call asking those questions to prove they are what we say they are. You had to put it up on the screen instead of just handing it to the witness, and ask your questions, and then move to have it admitted, deal with objections, and then use it. And then the real trick I found was actually remembering to take it off the screen when you're done asking about that exhibit, because you want Judge to see everyone's faces real well and all that. So that was the harder part, was remembering to stop sharing the screen on an exhibit when you were done with it.
Yeah. And I know that for the past 7 months, most of us have been using Zoom and Teams, and we all have experienced some technical difficulties. So was that something that happened in this trial, and to what extent?
Yes, it did. I mean, I think it was just the same as what everybody has on their conferences with work and with nonprofits that they do stuff with. So, in our trial, sometimes we were waiting, in particular on the husband, the other side. He had some trouble logging in, so we had to wait for that to get resolved. One time, I think it took like 20 minutes or so. We had one time where opposing counsel was muted and he didn't realize it. And I saw him trying to object, but nobody could hear it. So I texted him and said, "Hey, Mark, you're muted." So he fixed that. And then another time, we had a day where Judge was late because she had some other emergency proceedings she had to deal with. And so we were limited on time for that day anyway. And then we ended up having audio issues with our client. There was a horrible echo and it was distracting to everybody. So we tried moving her iPad up and moving it closer, everything. And eventually what I did was Judge went ahead and ended for that day because of the audio issue. I think we went for like 30 minutes or an hour that day. And as soon as we were done, I hopped on Amazon and had a headset delivered to her that she could just plug in. So that arrived immediately, and that's what we used the rest of the trial for her.
Very good idea.
Yeah.
Being home during COVID, like, today I have a 5-year-old at home and I've done several depositions, and there have been times like in the middle of the deposition, I have, Mommy, can I have some juice? It puts a damper on things for a moment. Did anybody have any experience like that at home? Like, how difficult was it to conduct a trial? Like, if you have a spouse or children or the lawnmower man in the back, like, how did y'all work those issues out?
Yes, we had some of that. So I had one time it was like right as we were getting started, my wife came in before she left for work, and she was putting a new pillowcase on a pillow. My office is in our bedroom. We have room for my desk and stuff in here. And she was, shaking the pillow into the pillowcase, and it was really loud. And finally I just spoke up and said, "Good morning, Your Honor," really loud, and kind of gave her a look like, "Get out of here." And then another time I told Judge, we host a learning pod in our house. So we have our 3 sons and then 2 other kids who are their age who come over each day. And we have a teacher who's not teaching at schools right now who comes to help them. And trial went later in the day than we planned. And so our teacher had to leave, and I couldn't get a hold of the other mom. And so I just told Judge, I was like, "Your Honor, we have a learning pod in our house. Our teacher had to leave. There's 5 boys downstairs, unattended or, unsupervised. And so I apologize in advance for whatever disruptions we may have." Luckily, nothing actually happened.
I'm sure the judge was pretty understanding under the circumstances.
She was really great the whole way through the trial, understanding the unique circumstances that all of this presents.
That's an important note. Like, the judge, when you have a trial and, any proceedings, they set the tone and they lead. So what was your experience with that judge? Like, what ways did she put people at ease? Like, how do you think the success, or maybe lack thereof, we'll talk about it in a moment, but what effect do you think, or that the judge had on how things went?
I think the judge had a very big impact on how smoothly things went. And I think the bulk of that came from what I perceive to be her patience and understanding with the issues that come with doing all of this over Zoom. I've had other evidentiary hearings, which are very similar to a trial. You're doing exhibits and witnesses and all that. And the judges were not as patient and didn't seem to be as, I guess they didn't seem to have gone through the Zoom hearing process as much, and so with witnesses and exhibits. And so I felt like a huge part of the success of this particular trial was judge being patient, knowledgeable about the technology, and able to keep us moving effectively even while we were dealing with some technical glitches.
And you made me note something. A good question I have is, so when you're doing the Zoom trials as opposed to like in person, with the equipment, is it the responsibility of all the parties and the witnesses to have their own, or is there a situation where like the court provides you the ability to maybe like check it out and then check it back in?
No, on this, it was, you got to have your own computer and camera and all that set up. The court provides the Zoom link, and then you're on your own. So, what I did, for example, is I would have all my exhibits in their own folder on my desktop so that those were ready and I wouldn't have to go digging for them when it was time to share one on the screen. So that's just one thing, but that's something else that we didn't have a scheduling order in this case that required us to exchange exhibits in advance. So normally in that sort of a trial, you can just show up with whatever you want. But with Zoom, you do have to submit all your exhibits ahead of time so that the court has them on their system also. So that's another part that's a little different, is having to file everything electronically into a Dropbox folder, basically.
Sam, do you think that there was anything positive about conducting this bench trial via Zoom as opposed to in person?
Oh yeah, I do. I think it was very efficient from a cost perspective, I think, for our clients because they didn't have to pay for drive time to and from the courthouse. They didn't have to pay for us. One day, for example, that I think I mentioned this already, Judge had a day where she had some emergency procedures that she had to deal with. And we were waiting for, I think, an hour and a half to 2 hours probably for her from when we were scheduled to start. And so during that, the lawyers were able to just kind of mute and turn off our video and work on some other stuff. Whereas normally we would have just been sitting there, right, watching in the courtroom these other procedures or proceedings and waiting and having to bill our client. So I think that's probably the most beneficial is for the clients. But also, you know, I think Judge was just able to move us along more quickly because of the Zoom aspect and not having to pack up all of our things each time we came and went and all that kind of stuff.
That sounds like a very positive note. Like that's probably the worst part of like attending hearings and trials is lugging all that. Like my back has enjoyed the break the past 7 months.
Right, exactly.
From your perspective, what was the most difficult aspect of conducting the trial via Zoom?
Mm-hmm. For me, it was the stretched out schedule, right? It was just tough because, like I was saying before, when we spend all that time preparing, you kind of get your head in the game, right? And by the time you're walking into the courthouse, if you didn't already, you know every tiny aspect of the evidence in your case so well. And so to have a 2-week gap, for example, or even a 2-day gap between days of trial was probably the biggest challenge of doing it that way.
If you were able to, is there anything that you would have changed about how the trial was conducted?
I don't think so. Just the scheduling. Again, I attribute a lot of that to the way the judge managed things. So, and opposing counsel. That's the other part of it is we had a real good working relationship with opposing counsel going into trial, and obviously we fought and argued against each other and tried to slam each other's clients at, while we were cross-examining. But when there were issues with documents or anything like that, we were able to work real well together, and that made it easier. So if all those things hadn't been in place, I probably would be saying I have a lot more that I would have changed about the process.
Now, would you be opposed to doing another trial via Zoom?
I don't think so. Again, I would want to weigh how my judge had been previously on the case and in technology, any hearings we may have had, and seeing how they dealt with the technology side. I might also be concerned with opposing counsel being able to manage it as well. But after this particular experience, as opposed to some of the other evidentiary hearings I had done earlier, I don't think I would object to it for a bench trial.
Now, there's some hesitation, I felt. So you would not be opposed to it for a bench trial, but what about a jury trial?
I'm not sure about that one. I would, with a bench trial, you can assume usually that the judge knows how to take in evidence and how to give weight to evidence. And obviously they're experienced at judging credibility of witnesses and all that kind of stuff. With a jury trial, there's more of a personal connection that you need to make, right? And there's a lot to be said for being in the room with that group of people, not only knowing that they're watching you closely and reading your body language, but so you can read theirs and see how they respond to questions and how they respond to witnesses. And maybe you might see all of them scratching their head while you're talking about a document and realize on the fly that you need to ask some questions of your witness that will help further clarify that. I'm not convinced yet that you can utilize all those same tools of perception over Zoom in a way that you can when you're in the room together.
Oh, definitely. I totally agree with that. There is definitely something about face-to-face interaction. Now, a little bit earlier today, off camera, we had talked about the fact that in Dallas County, they have implemented a plan to return back to in-person jury trials, which a lot of people are hesitant and, rightfully so and concerned about. But you mentioned that they're already starting that in Collin County, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's very different than the way it used to be. So, and this is common at a lot of courthouses, right? On the first floor, we have the central jury room, which is when people get called in for jury duty, everybody flows in. I think the one in Collin County holds 600 or 700-ish people. And then you would get taken up in large groups up to the courtroom where the lawyers and maybe even the judge would ask questions, and you pick your jury out of that jury pool. Well, right now, instead, we've got the central jury room being used for jury selection. So it's a huge room so everybody can space out. And then once the jury is picked, they go upstairs to the courtroom, and they sit in the back in the gallery area that's usually reserved for the public and any witnesses that haven't been excluded from the courtroom. The lawyers then are on the other side of their table, so their back is to the judge so that they can face the jury. And from what I understand, the witness box is off kind of to the side. So the lawyers kind of turn to the side when they're examining the witness, trying to still have some sliver of their face going toward the jury. So just a very different situation, but it's also that everybody can be spaced apart and as safe as possible during the process.
And I have two quick questions for you, and just answer them to the extent that you have knowledge. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but in Collin County, one, are the jurors and everyone in the court, are they required to wear masks? And have you heard anything about whether or not people who are being summoned are actually showing up?
Right, good questions. Everybody is required to wear a mask in the courthouse, yes. And then as far as I haven't heard about people showing up or not. I mean, I think we all know that prior to COVID, we still had issues with jury, people who had been summoned showing up for jury duty. So I suspect that's not changed.
Yeah. Now, Sam, you are a principal at Johnson and Sparks PLLC in Plano. Has your firm handled any COVID-19 related litigation?
We're just starting with the litigation. We did at the beginning of all of this. We have a general counsel side to our practice. So we spent that first month probably advising all of our business clients, what they could do, what they couldn't, what they had to do, whether they were even allowed to be open or not, whether they could have delivery drivers going through Dallas County versus Collin County versus Tarrant, because all the different counties had different rules going as to what constituted, essential businesses. Now we're starting to see the litigation pop up, and I know other firms are starting also. So the ones we're working on are mostly commercial landlord-tenant cases where people are just not able to be open, or even if they are, they don't have the customers coming in and they're not paying their rent. So, we're about to file a $3 million lawsuit for rent that's owed over the term of the lease. We've had a couple that we've tried to help negotiate at least removing everything so that the landlord could just take possession back. So yeah, that's all starting. And I think it's going to open up. I know you were talking about this a little bit at the beginning today. It's opening up a lot of questions that courts are going to have to resolve over the next few years, I think.
Absolutely. You and I both are very interested in watching to see how things go. COVID will definitely impact the world of litigation for years to come. Now, Sam, I mentioned earlier that you are currently running for judge in Collin County, Texas. How has COVID affected the way that you've campaigned?
It has turned it upside down, actually. So, normally we would have spent really all of this year hosting in-person events, attending other people's in-person events. We would have been knocking on doors and talking to voters for months and months already. And we've not really done much of any of that. So we've had one in-person event that we hosted, and that was just a few weeks ago, actually. And then we've only for about a month now been going and mostly just leaving literature on people's doors without knocking and talking. But when we do encounter somebody, we're staying very far away, and we've got, we wear a mask the whole time. So it's still a suspicious interaction, I guess you could say.
Yeah. We were talking earlier too about, I told you that I'd gotten just yesterday alone about 13 political phone calls and text messages, and I cannot wait for it to stop. But I am glad that, I've seen all the candidates for different races locally being very safe and cautious about, the rest of us, and that's definitely appreciated. Sam, do you have a couple minutes to stick around for some questions that we have popped up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you. One question we have for you, Sam, is that it says that, do you think that post COVID-19 that will conducting trials via Zoom be like the new wave of the future?
I do think Zoom and similar, technology is probably here to stay in courtrooms, right? I think we'll see a lot of parties being agreeable to hearings via Zoom. I think we'll see bench trials probably via Zoom a lot. It also kind of depends what type of case it is. So, on the civil side, like family cases or auto collisions or contract cases, that one I could see being, very commonly using Zoom for your trial, especially for a bench trial. On criminal cases, I think we're going to see a lot more hesitation from criminal defendants who have a constitutional right to confront their accuser and present a defense, right? And so I know criminal defense attorneys are not feeling like giving up that in-person connection. But even in the civil cases, the parties have certain due process rights still in their case. And so I think it'll just be up to the parties what they're comfortable with at the end of the day.
Understood. I have another question for you, Sam. So Sam, you are currently running for judge. If you were to win, would Zoom trials be an option in your court?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think by and large, it would be up to the parties to decide, but I would more than happily, host a trial via Zoom if that's what both parties were agreeing to.
Well, Sam, I definitely want to thank you for your time today. This has been an amazing episode. You've been so informative about how trials are being handled via Zoom. And, I think that a lot of us attorneys are really looking at that because not every county or court system is opening up right at this time. So Zoom may be the way to go for a while for most of us. Thank you so much for offering your perspective and giving us your time. I know that you are taking a break from campaigning to be here with us. And to the rest of you, thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you on the next Holden Litigation COVID-19 webinar.